Hola class, how we doing? Welcome to chapter 8. Since Mother Nature keeps throwing us all these curveballs, we have to stay on track and do it through alternative methods. Now, chapter 8 here is going to be strictly a video lecture. I will be happy to answer any questions at the beginning of class on Thursday or the following Tuesday. But for now, we're going to get through chapter 8 video-wise. I like to think about chapter 8 the way we ended chapter 2, where we were talking about growth strategies and whether the market is new and whether the product is new. And quite often when we have a current product in a new market, this market development quadrant down here, or even new, this tends to be done in a global context, particularly taking a current product and bringing it to a new market, usually outside the home or domestic market. So this is a really big deal, this slide right here. This is in the beginning of chapter 8. I guarantee you it's going to be on exam number 2. And when we are thinking about going abroad and going to global markets, we can't just say, okay, let's go do it. We have a number of things that we need to look at. And we're going to look at these 4 quadrants in turn. And notice there's a little arrows here. What they're trying to say is that these are all interrelated. Even though we're going to look at them in isolation, they're not really in isolation. Technology, they're all together. So let's start off with economic analysis. When we think about... All right, hold on one second. I just wanted to go back and double check the page number. This is page 223, okay? So when we're getting into economic analysis, we're looking at a number of different factors. I mean, we're looking at gross domestic product. This is usually of the country. So GDP, based upon your national income, if there's more of a consumer goods or a manufacturing economy, then this might be higher. Gross national income, oh, that's interesting. Gross national income, okay, is like on average what individuals in that country make on average. So we make on average X number of $1,000s a year here in the United States. Well, in dollar terms, there's many countries around the world that don't make half of what the average person in the United States make, gross national income. But that said, it's not just about how much money you make. It's how much purchasing power your income has in a particular nation. A nation, and I'm going to exaggerate here, a nation might have a gross national income of $7,200 a year. But that's $7,200 a year given the purchasing power parity of the company, of the country they live in. That might be middle class. That might be, I don't know, the equivalent of like $58,000 a year here in the United States. Okay. Some other econ indicators, we are looking at market size and market growth. We're basically looking for countries with a large population and are also growing fast. These tend to be some of the best for marketers to target. If you're an automaker, chances are you're looking at Brazil, and you're looking at India, and you're looking at Russia, you're looking at China. This has some of that flavor that I was just talking about, evaluating real income. I mean, you see 2 dramatically different photos right here. This is more like a Costco type scenario. This is more of an open air kind of a market. Look at the stacks of all this product here. It's kind of interesting. But firms usually make, depending on the income levels, in the various countries, firms make product adjustments. They might package things smaller. They might use cheaper packaging. They might change certain ingredients and all like that to make the price more attractive for that particular marketplace. All right. Beyond economics, you need to look at infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, let's just talk about telecom, for instance. You can't do banking without strong data communications. You need fiber optics. You need big-time telecom technology in order to have a bank in today's world. Transportation. Now, we're used to thinking about driving a tractor-trailer from coast to coast. A lot of countries are not that big. You hit a border. Think about Europe. Or they use rail a lot more than highway. Or some places, you really can't get product to certain areas. I'm thinking about South America because it's all mountain. So you're not going to load an 18-wheeler up. You probably will load a smaller truck. Other countries have different distribution channels for certain things. We think about buying electronics, and you talk about buying it in like a Best Buy or a very large big box retailer. Well, big box retailers aren't common all around the world. You might have a lot more mom and pop shops, kind of like this. Finally, commerce and currency. In Europe, we have the... let me say something real about this real quick. Transportation or logistics. If I can just pop this up right here. Here's a big wide shot of Europe, where we have the UK here, Ireland, Spain, France, Germany, Poland. We have the former Russian republics here. We have Russia over here, and the northern Nordic countries up here. Well, believe it or not, it's Netherlands, which is the big hub for boats that are coming in. This has the biggest, deepest water, and has the biggest shipyards in Europe. And from here, the Netherlands is linked via rail everywhere. From the Netherlands, you can get product anywhere in Europe. So product tends to come in from China or the United States and actually comes into the Netherlands first. Because this is the logistics infrastructure, the distribution channel for the EU. PowerPoint. Commerce, currency. For instance, in Canada, they got rid of the penny, the smallest, so you have to think about that. In England, they still have the pound, but the rest of Europe, they are using the euro, and the euro is under pressure in certain parts. Think about Greece, think about Spain, unemployment. Government, you have to be involved with analyzing what's going on in government. I mean, just think about what the EU has been doing with currency and trying to make sure that all our countries stay afloat. This is exchange control, particularly about the currency and what they do. China particularly plays with their... Actually, all countries play with their currency to try to see if they can make it cheaper versus other countries so it's easier for you to trade. Your products will be cheaper around the world. Now, a trade agreement is something that one country makes with another country in order to lower tariffs. In the United States, we have NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, U.S., Canada, Mexico. The biggest one in the world is the EU. But there are many others. There's, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and one of the countries down there. It's escaping me at the moment. They have another trade agreement. There's trade agreements. There's one in Asia. The trade agreements reduce tariffs among members of the trade agreement. Sometimes, like in the EU, there's also a currency component to it, but most of the time it's just a trade agreement. Now, tariffs and quotas. Their goal, tariff is a tax. T tax, T tariff. Right? it raises the price of a foreign product coming into the domestic marketplace for the purpose of making domestic goods cheaper. Quota limits the number of products that can come in from a foreign marketplace into a particular marketplace. So during the 80s, the Japanese audio manufacturers agreed to U.S. quotas that they would only bring in so many cars to the United States. Well, because demand was so high, and so not that many of them were coming in, when you have high demand and low supply, prices increase. And the Japanese manufacturers were very happy about that, because then they could go from being, only known for an economy car to start moving up into more mid-class and luxury class. You have to be involved with sociocultural factors if we're going abroad. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, we've talked about culture a number of different ways this semester, and unsurprising to you, you knew we were going to come back to it in the global chapter. Now, all these 5 things, we're going to talk about them, in turn, play into the culture, the norms, the expectations of consumers in a particular nation. There are some countries that are masculine dominant, pure masculine dominant, and the language, the laws, the government, it is a masculine dominant nation. Some of the Middle Eastern nations come to mind. There are some nations that are particularly trying to take all the gender, not traits, but gender out of normal everyday things. Sweden comes to mind, to the point where, they're getting rid of pink and blue, and they're having less toys that are just for girls and less toys that are just for boys, and they're trying to become gender neutral. Time orientation. For my students in class that are familiar with Latin American culture has a different concept of time. 8 o'clock is not 8 o'clock. If you get invited to someone's house and the party begins at 8 o'clock, if you were to show up before 9, that would be an embarrassment. Fashionably late, you're very fashionably late. But there are other cultures where time orientation, the time, U.S., Germany, time is time. 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock. Now, this is from Hofstede. He talks about, there's some very, very good graphs here on 241, country clusters. When we look at individualism versus collectivism, individualism, countries like the United States, Australia, the UK, Canada, the countries were founded on individual freedom and individual beliefs. Rags to riches kind of, that's an individualistic type trait. There are many societies around the world that are more collectivist in nature. Japan comes to mind, and there's some kind of an expression in Japanese that says something like, the nail that sticks up too high gets hammered down. In other words, don't stand out from the crowd. It's rude, it's improper, it's not good form. So that's individualism versus collectivism. Now we talk about power distance. Power distance is not class, but power distance is, is it a very, very formal culture or more of an informal culture? Okay. Usually more individualistic type nations are less formal with lower power distance. You could go into firms in the United States that are not very hierarchical, that anyone's allowed to say something. There are many countries around the world, particularly in collectivist societies, where there's a very, very high power distance, that you don't question authority. You do not speak up. You go through the proper channels. And there tends to be very hierarchical in nature. Finally, we have uncertainty avoidance. There are some people that are comfortable with ambiguity. There are many cultures that are not comfortable with ambiguity. So it's this uncertainty. You know, there's expressions in culture around luck, around fortune, around fate, and this kind of all plays into this certainty or uncertainty avoidance. So, very, 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 very good slide, meaning I will ask you this on the next exam, page 246. When we're thinking about this, okay, there are multiple ways to do this. There's multiple ways to go abroad. And the book talks about these 5 in particular, okay. That said, they put this on again, this is really a 2x2 class. The higher the control, the higher the risk. The higher the risk, the higher the return. Taking a product from your domestic market and simply exporting it, there's little control. There's also little risk. You know, not a problem. Usually this is the first step going abroad. Some companies franchise, meaning they let established corporations in a domestic market take the branding of something from one country and bring it to another country. In the United States, Benetton is a franchise. Okay? In Europe, Starbucks is actually a franchise. In multiple other parts of the world, McDonald's is a franchise, both here and around the world. Okay, a strategic alliance is when 2 companies get together, okay, and they have some kind of an agreement. Many times, this is just a handshake agreement, or it's a short-term legal agreement. Nestle, for instance, does not have a strong distribution network here in the United States for soft drinks, but Pepsi does. So Pepsi created a strategic alliance with Nestle to distribute Nestea iced tea in the cans through Pepsi's bottling network. It's a strategic alliance. You could do that in another country as well, going abroad. Joint venture. Joint venture is when 2 companies actually create a third company. You know, this is a lot of legal, a lot of capital. You know, employees from both firms, you know, might shift over, or 1 or 2 people. And this is for a long-term type environment. A lot of the Japanese auto manufacturers, when they were coming to the United States, they did not want to go it alone. So the first Toyota plants in the United States were joint ventures with General Motors. You know, a lot of the pharmaceutical companies in the United States go to other parts of the world, and it's a joint venture. Half of the money from one company, half of the money from the other company. Or it could be more than one company. Direct investment. It has the highest risk. It has the highest amount of control. But this is when a company goes alone, they go abroad, they fund the whole thing by themselves, and they're all by themselves. I mean, Toyota did joint ventures during the 80s, but by the mid-90s, they were building their own plants in the United States. Mercedes-Benz has plants in Alabama, and BMW has a huge plant in South Carolina. Hyundai has a huge one in... Where's Hyundai's? Toyota's is in Kentucky. I'm trying to think. I gotta Google where Hyundai's is. Okay. The last part of the chapter, we're talking about, again, chapter 2, we need a global strategy. We're still making a plan. We have to take into account cultural nuances, subcultures. Now, a culture within a culture is a subculture. So think about the United States is predominantly an individualistic culture. But if you were to come visit the United States and you were to visit Boston versus Miami versus Chicago versus San Francisco versus somewhere in New Mexico or Arizona, these are various subcultures within the larger culture. You know, Miami and New York are different enough. San Francisco and Miami are different enough. Dallas and San Francisco are different enough. You know, depending on the product and the consumer role, some companies need to make adjustments. Who buys the product or who uses the product vis-a-vis how it's used in the domestic marketplace. Meaning there could be different positioning. And perhaps either the product gets adapted, the positioning gets adapted, the target market gets adapted. I mean, it may sound crazy, but if you go to the Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where Coca-Cola Corporation is headquartered, you can taste a number of different variations of Coca-Cola around the world, because the flavor profile that we have here in the United States is not the same flavor profile in other parts of the world. Our drinks tend to be sweeter. Other places around the world, they tend to be less sweet. There are some companies that do a single positioning strategy no matter where they are in the world. There are not too many of these companies. Apple has the same positioning strategy around the world. But this is the exception, not the rule. Most products go to another market and adapt. So this is what we're talking about. Do we sell the same product or service in both the home market and the country in the foreign market? Sometimes you can do that, sometimes you cannot do that. I mean, even Apple, when they go to China and they sell the iPhone, it still has a different software option, so you can have Chinese characters and there's some, language oriented. Some of us can, do things to our iPhones for our particular host country. But it's still technologically the same product. It's just slightly adapted. We could sell a product or service similar to that sold in the home country, but include some minor adaptations. This is more like what Coke does. Or we can sell totally new products and services created specifically just for that particular market. Some of the auto manufacturers, SUVs are popular here, but not very popular around the world. The Japanese manufacturers are selling SUVs here, but not necessarily, you don't see a Tacoma pickup in Japan. So this is a continuum from same to totally new. So when we're thinking about the marketing mix, the 4 Ps, and we're thinking particularly about pricing, quotas and tariffs affect price. This raises it. Quotas also tends to raise price. Competition influences price in what you can. Maybe there's more competitors in a particular marketplace than there were in the domestic marketplace, and you want to get some market share, so you price your product lower. The economic conditions of a particular marketplace may impact what the price is. I was just reading today that Apple opened their first store in Brazil in advance of the 2014 World Cup. An iPhone in Brazil starts at $1,200. Yikes. Anti-dumping policies is when a company brings a product into another country at such a ridiculously low price that it wipes out domestic options. This is called dumping, and it's an aggressive competitive tactic that most countries around the world have laws against it. When we talk about distribution, I think we've hit on this quite a bit here. We have global channels are very long. I mean, if we're thinking about when we put stuff on a boat from China to Long Beach, California, which is one of the biggest shipping hubs by boat for us. I mean, when we have product come in, it comes into Long Beach, California. And what was the last Iron Man movie? When they had the big battle at the end? That was Long Beach. All those shipping containers? Yeah, exactly. And then from LA, it goes by rail all over the United States, Canada, and that kind of thing. So when consumers can shop local and smaller stores, there tend to be less big box. You have to have a lot more middlemen to get the products to the smaller mom and pop stores. So suppliers must be creative in delivering to these outlets. In Japan, where it's very congested, there's no huge, gigantic Toys R Us's. There's smaller Toys R Us's. But, most supermarkets in Japan are also more like corner markets. Because people go to buy food 3-4 times a week as opposed to we do it once. They don't have the refrigerators that we have because their apartments are significantly smaller than our homes. Space is at a premium in Japan. So, mayonnaise, you buy a little mayonnaise. You buy a little ketchup because you don't want to take that much space in your refrigerator. You don't need a huge ketchup. And you can buy it more frequently. Finally, we wrap up this chapter with Miss Gaga. The book talks about her 10,000 followers on Twitter. It's substantially higher by now. But when you're thinking about promoting a product around the world, literacy levels is a very, very big deal. Either in actual literacy or financial literacy. You have to decide whether you want to adapt to the local language. Sometimes it has more cachet if you don't adapt it. A lot of higher end products do not do that. Lower ones might, but maybe not. We have cultural and religious differences that are a big deal. I mentioned previously in the semester when McDonald's went to India. That's a beef hamburger. The cow is sacred in most parts of India. You have to change and adapt your product and also how you advertise it. When we have individualistic societies, you tend to advertise to the end buyer. In collectivist societies, the family makes the decision. So General Electric is talking about refrigerators, but in the ad is mom, dad, grandmom, grandpop, kids. It's a family decision. Okay, that's chapter 8. I'm also going to put these PowerPoint slides up on Blackboard. Thanks.